Organizations are racing to become more data-driven. But data, facts, and numbers rarely get us excited and motivated. Humans are hardwired to engage with stories. Data storytelling is a powerful tool that we can use to captivate an audience and enable them to engage with complex, data-driven insights. In the past decade, there has been a huge emphasis on developing the skills to manage, interpret, and analyze data. But how many of us ever learned in school, university, or other training how to present data to an audience? Because this skill is often neglected, we live in a world that is full of poorly designed, overly complex, and confusing data visualizations. I'm going to kick off this session with 4 particularly poorly designed charts. As we examine these charts, I want you to note, why don't you like them? What has gone wrong with these charts? And then we're going to work through how to fix them. Our first chart is a line chart that is attempting to show the composition of calories and micronutrients that human beings have been consuming over what looks like a very long period of time. Okay, lots going on here. Next, we have a lovely radar chart, charting the level of support provided by 7 survey participants to 7 different questions which we see placed around the radar. No collection of poorly designed charts is complete without a 3D pie chart. And finally, the creme de la creme, my favorite bad chart of all time, the banana export dual axis 3D bar chart, complete with a low resolution background image of actual bananas. So what problems do all 4 of these shockingly ill-conceived attempts at data visualization have in common? Here are some common answers from our learners. These charts are difficult to read. They're cluttered with unnecessary garbage like 3D. They have no clear insights. We're utterly unsure what the point of these charts are. And we have no idea where to look. Our eyes are drawn here, there, and everywhere with all the bright colors. So we're going to right the wrongs of these charts. And in doing so, these actions that we're going to introduce will form StudioIQ's 4 Ds of data storytelling. The 4 Ds is a 4-step process that we can use to tell compelling stories with data. Many of the fancy-looking charts we've seen, like radar charts and 3D charts, might look cool, but we're going to see how they massively hinder the interpretability of our data for our end user. First, we're going to display the data using the best visualization type to showcase our insights. So, should we use a table, a chart? Should we just tell our audience the insights via simple text? And if we're going to use a chart, what chart type should we select? We're going to address all that clutter, and we're going to remove everything from our visualization that isn't necessary to tell our story. Then, we're going to distill all the information captured in our charts to just a few key insights that our audience actually needs. Finally, we'll direct our audience's attention so that they can focus on the most important components of our visualization that support those key insights and prove them with data. Let's work through an example. We have some real data that was gathered from a survey of teenagers in the US. The survey was conducted quarterly and asked, what is your favorite social media platform? All I've done here is taken the raw data, dumped it into Excel, and then selected one of Excel's recommended charts. Take a moment to consider, what is wrong with this chart and how might we fix it? The first issue that I want to prioritize addressing is the chart type itself. We want to display this data using a better visualization option. This is where we're going to get the most bang for buck improving the chart. So how do we pick the right chart to deploy in any given situation? Well, let's take a look at some research performed by two statisticians, William Cleveland and Robert McGill. So back in the 1980s, Cleveland and McGill wanted to understand how well human beings process different types of charts. So they gathered 51 human test subjects and performed some experiments on them. They showed the subjects a bunch of charts that used attributes like position, length, volume, and even color to encode numeric values. And they called these methods of encoding data visually elementary perceptual tasks. They measured how accurate their test subjects were at interpreting charts that used these different elementary perceptual tasks, and developed this hierarchy based on the overall accuracy of the participants. Let's look at a few examples. Right at the top of the Cleveland-McGill scale, we have positions on a common scale. So everyone is going to be able to tell that A is higher than B. But what about our 100% stacked bar chart? It's right in the middle of the Cleveland-McGill scale. It's using lengths on non-aligned bases to encode the values of each data point. This is around the middle of the Cleveland-McGill scale, and it's where most people start to struggle a little bit. Let's say we want to compare Instagram's performance in Q4 2015 to Q4 2017. This comparison should be easy to make, right? Well, how confident would you be in saying which value is greater, A or B? This task is challenging because A and B don't start with a consistent baseline. It's much easier to compare values for the Snapchat series as they all start along a flat baseline. But with a 100% stacked bar chart, all the other series get stacked on top of each other, making comparisons over time quite difficult. So let's improve our chart. Moving up one position on the Cleveland-McGill scale gets us to lengths on a common base. Most of us will still not like this chart design. You might even think it looks worse. But we have achieved a real improvement here. It's now much easier to compare the heights of the bars over time. Now we can at least answer that simple question of which was higher for Instagram, Q4 2015 or Q4 2017, just by looking at the chart. But that comparison is not so easy with all these other brightly colored, distracting bars that we have to contend with. So let's elevate our chart all the way up to the top of the Cleveland-McGill scale. And here's what it looks like using positions on a common scale. We've removed a lot of the ink from the chart. We just need to join the dots to connect observations from the same series, in this case social media platforms, together. We've soared to the top of the Cleveland-McGill scale, and now we can de-emphasize the dots. The jagged edges of the lines are enough to show each point value using positions on a common scale. So now we have a fairly standard line chart, which is generally going to be the best option for visualizing time series data. Unfortunately, our software often adds in distracting and unnecessary components by default. Even more unfortunately, many people choose to add even more distracting components or chart junk to their visuals. So our next step is to declutter. We're going to be relentless in removing any visual components that aren't working hard for us. First, I'm going to take out those grid lines. In this case, they are competing for attention with the series lines that actually showed the data. I'm also going to thicken the series lines for each platform to make them a bit easier to read. We can also go from increments of 5% to 10% to declutter our y-axis a little bit. The final piece I want to remove is this legend. This legend is making our audience do work. Our eyes have to track up and down between the labels and each of the series, and as we do this, we have to track each color in our working memory. To make matters worse, we have two very similar shades of blue being used for Snapchat and Pinterest that could get quite confusing. This is all cognitive effort that our audience could be using to understand the message behind our chart, rather than trying to figure out how to interpret the chart. An alternative to traditional legends is to use the Gestalt laws of visual perception. These Gestalt laws were discovered by German psychologists in the 1920s, and they govern how we naturally perceive objects as belonging together in groups. The first Gestalt law of proximity simply states that objects that are physically near to each other are perceived as belonging in the same group. Most people will see 3 columns of dots here, rather than seeing the dots as forming rows. This is because the dots are so much closer to each other vertically down the page as columns than they are horizontally across the rows of this matrix. When we change the proximity of the dots, suddenly our perceptions are reversed, and most of us will now see the dots as belonging together in rows across the page. Let's leverage this Gestalt law of proximity in our chart design and place the labels for each series right next to the series that they represent. Sometimes when we place our labels next to our lines like this, our labels end up looking a little bit cramped. But this could be an opportunity to further remove unneeded components from our chart. Take a look at Pinterest. Its peak value is just 3%. It's unlikely to be a focal point of our story. So let's roll Pinterest into the other category, creating some more space for our labels and simplifying our chart. I'm going to add some data labels showing each platform's market share in the most recent period. Now let's look at the Gestalt law of similarity. This time all the dots in our matrix are evenly spaced apart, forming a perfect square. But we most likely still see columns rather than rows. This is reinforced by similarity of color. Once again, we can easily reverse our audience's perception and guide them to see rows instead of columns. So let's apply the Gestalt law of similarity to our chart. We'll strengthen that association between the labels and the series by making the labels the same color as each of the series that they represent. We finally have a chart that is decluttered and is free of distracting and unnecessary components. Now that we're working with a chart that's easier to read and interpret, we can distill our key insights. Our current title tells our audience what's in the chart, but it fails to tell our audience why they should care about the chart. So we're going to free up plenty of space above our chart to articulate to our audience very clearly what that key takeaway is. In our training courses, we'll work through a methodology for tailoring your message to the needs of your audience. For today's purposes, I'm going to share an insight that I've uncovered that could be of interest to a very broad audience. Instagram was declining, but has recovered since the release of Insta Stories and has taken the top spot among US teens. This headline describes an interesting trend, and it's accurate, but you're probably not getting too excited and invested in the story right now. Let's make it shorter and punchier. What about Insta Stories has rocketed Instagram to #1 with teens? We've captured that we're talking about US teens' favorite social media platform in the y-axis title, so we don't need to repeat it in our headline. We're also introducing some dramatic words like rocketed to grab our audience's attention. Our title is now like a newspaper headline. Just like a newspaper headline, we're conveying as much information as we can with as few words as we can, and we're trying to grab our audience's attention and motivate them to learn more. So we've distilled our key insights, and we even have a catchy title. But we also need to back up the assertions we're making in our title. We need to prove them with evidence and data. And to do that, we want to direct our audience's attention to the most critical components of our visualization that support our key insights. To focus our audience's attention, we're going to leverage pre-attentive attributes. Pre-attentive attributes are visual attributes that we notice during pre-attentive processing. And pre-attentive processing happens unconsciously, and it happens very rapidly. I'm going to vary some pre-attentive attributes, and in each case, you're going to notice the odd one out. So I can vary color hue, size, I can add markers, change line widths, and every time you'll be drawn to the objects where I've varied these pre-attentive attributes, and you'll notice them within fractions of a second. To see why this is so useful, let's conduct a quick experiment. How many times does the letter W appear in the sequence of letters below? Take a few seconds. How about now? Now we're all going to be able to see that the answer is 6, and we get there so much faster. This task becomes dramatically easier to perform just by layering on a subtle pre-attentive attribute of line width or bolding. But what if I want to make it even more obvious? What if I want the answer to absolutely leap off the page? Well, I can layer on one more pre-attentive attribute, a particularly powerful pre-attentive attribute, color hue. What was a frustrating task that required us to go through and manually scan each letter and count the W's is now a piece of cake. So we can make life even easier for our audience by layering on even more pre-attentive attributes. Let's give it a try. Let's assign every letter its own color. And now, how many times does the letter G appear? Okay, that could take a while. It's actually 7 times. To get the answer, we'd probably have to go through and count again, just like when they were all gray. So pre-attentive attributes are an incredibly powerful tool for focusing attention, but they work best when used sparingly. The less we use pre-attentive attributes, the more impact they're going to have when we really need them to call out something valuable. Okay, back to our chart. Our story is all about Instagram. So let's make Instagram stand out by pushing the other series to the background with a neutral color. Gray is the perfect go-to color to de-emphasize supporting information that's not the main focus of your story. While we're on the topic of color, we also want to consider any pre-existing color associations that we can leverage to make our story clearer. In this case, Instagram has got a very recognizable logo. We'll further strengthen that connection by using that same color in the title as well. Are there any other pre-attentive attributes that we can use? We noted earlier that Insta Stories was released in Q3 of 2016, right when Instagram's popularity had hit rock bottom. We can add a simple line extending down to this point on our x-axis and an annotation telling our audience that this was the point in time that Insta Stories was released. Finally, we might want to call out and label a few key data points, such as Instagram's share at the start of the time series, Instagram's lowest point, which coincides with the release of Instagram Stories, and we already have the most recent data point as of the time the chart was created. A nice subtle pre-attentive attribute is some added data markers to convey very clearly which points in time on our Instagram series are being labeled. And here's our completed chart. So, working through the 4 Ds of data storytelling, we've come quite a long way from this chart using the default settings in Excel. But I always like to challenge myself. Can we go even simpler? What if we're not interested in the history so much? Let's say we want to tell a story about the 2 biggest players, Instagram and Snapchat, at this point in time. So now we're zeroing in on just 2 data points, Instagram's 43% versus Snapchat's 36%. How would we visualize this? Do we need a chart at all? We can try something very simple. At StudioIQ, we call this format an impact metric, because by stripping out all the unnecessary complexity, we increase the impact of the metrics that we want to place the most emphasis on. We're spelling out the key insights using simple text. A slide like this is so simple and so easy to create. It's nothing more than a text box. We've just emphasized the key number using some pre-attentive attributes. We've made it really large and highlighted it using that nice shade of pink from Instagram's logo. We've also been very concise in our selection of words describing the impact metric. All of these design choices result in a slide that provides very little opportunity for distraction. Because this approach is so simple, it provides an opportunity to inject a little bit of graphic design flair. We could reimagine our slide like this. This style of slide is ideal for a live presentation. Steve Jobs was one of the pioneers of this approach. Here he is using an impact metric in one of his keynote speeches. He's intentionally kept his slide very simple because he doesn't want you sitting there interpreting a complex visualization. He wants you hanging on his every word as he makes eye contact with you and shares with you the detail of why this 1.5 billion number is so interesting and so important. If you want to create a graphic impact metric like this, there's 3 simple rules of thumb to keep in mind. First, we're choosing a relevant background image. In this case, we've just got a teenager immersed in a social media platform on his phone. Second, we're making sure that the image isn't too busy or distracting, so no wild backgrounds or crazy colors. And third, we're making sure that the text in our impact metric is easy to read and stands out against the background. Here we've just got a solid black background, which allows us to use white and pink's text, which provide great contrast. Now, this approach, this graphic designed impact metric, is great for a keynote speech. But what about day-to-day business presentations? Well, we don't have to limit our impact metrics to one number per slide. A suite of multiple impact metrics can still be a simple and elegant alternative to a chart or table. Can we use a suite of impact metrics to replace this overly complex, busy chart? There's a lot that's wrong with this slide, but at least they've distilled a key takeaway and spelled it out in their title. Overall, it's a good news story. Customers love our new product. Okay, so where's the data that supports that? Well, it's buried in the text. 86% were happy with pricing, great. 79% happy with speed of service, and 77% happy with the quality of our new product line. If we just want to emphasize these 3 numbers, which work together to support our overarching message, why do we need the chart and the stars and all of this text? We can just lay out all 3 numbers as impact metrics on a slide just like this. 3 photographs could start to get pretty busy. So in this case, I've just added some icons. These icons are straight from the free icon library in Microsoft PowerPoint. Simple iconography like this results in a slide that's still simple and free of clutter, while leveraging some imagery that helps our audience connect with our story. So we've worked through all 4 Ds of data storytelling. First, we display the data using the best visualization type to showcase our insights. Next, we declutter and remove any distracting or unnecessary components from our visualization. We're then ready to distill down to the most important key insights that our audience needs to consume. And finally, we're going to direct our audience's attention to the most critical components of our visualization that support our key insights. If you want to learn more, visit StudioIQ.com. You can try our on-demand online data storytelling course, which provides detailed instructions on how to execute all 4 Ds of data storytelling, complete with practical exercises that will help build your confidence. Or talk to us about a custom workshop at your organization. Our live workshops are very hands-on. Our expert instructors can work with you and your team to improve your charts, reports, and dashboards so that everyone walks away from the session with improved data stories and practical skills that you can apply immediately.